Hi, I'm Jeremy Robinson and this is the 19th hole. Hi, I'm Jeremy Robinson and welcome to the 19th hole, Black Star Golf's podcast presented by glal.uk. As I mentioned previously, through my years of being involved in golf, I've met some great people. And so far on the podcast, we've had some world-class guests. So today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by David Leadbetter. David's one of the most respected coaches in the world of golf, and personally was a great help to me when I first turned pro. So Dave, many thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure, Jeremy. Pleasure. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. So as I mentioned, you're one of the most respected coaches in the world of golf, and you have been for a long time. Coach Nick Faldo and Ernie Els, amongst many others. But I first met you in 1988. I remember at Greenleaf, and that's going back a long time after I'd finished college at Florida State. But from your point of view, going back pre-1988, where did you kind of start playing golf, and how did you get into it?
Well, although I was born in the UK, I actually grew up in Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia as it was back then. So, I had sort of I guess when you look at it, the people that I grew up with, people like Nick Price and Mark McNulty and Dennis Watson and Tony Johnson. I mean, there was a whole host of good young junior players. So I played a lot of different sports. So, I mean, it wasn't just golf. We played golf during school holidays, and I played a lot of cricket and hockey and tennis and athletics and so on. So it was, I think, back then you pretty much did them all, and which I think is still a good plan for even a lot of young players. Now I think a lot of young players maybe specialize on golf at too young an age, and I think you develop hand-eye coordination, dexterity, and you see kids get burnt out at sort of 17, 18 now, which is crazy. So it was a great upbringing, and so I was a two handicap when I turned pro. I went sort of the assistant route, and I just loved the golf business, shall we say. I didn't know how good I was going to get at playing, and I became a decent player. I played some tournaments in South Africa and so on, and actually probably what changed my life in many ways was actually Fox Hills, believe it or not. And probably wondering why Fox Hills, because that's where they had the PGA qualifying back in the day.
Yeah.
And so it's all qualifying, and I actually missed my card by a shot, and so I had to decide on what I wanted to do, because I'd actually left Africa at that point. The political problems and what have you were really growing, and I thought, well, the fact that I'm English, I could sort of go back to the UK, and it was quite a different lifestyle. Obviously, when you grow up in Africa, you've got weather 24 hours a day, 12 months a year, sort of thing, and so But I actually I got a club job up in the Midlands at Staverton Park, which I was the first club pro there.
Yeah.
And so the fellow was a cricketer, and we got on like a house on fire. He was a farmer who didn't know anything about it. He said, "Hey, we'll just run the club the way you want to run it." And so we put in a driving range and all sorts of things. And I went back and played in the Sunshine Tour during the winter. So it was great for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Then I had the opportunity of actually coming over to the States, because one of the well-known teachers at the time was a fellow called Phil Ritson, and I'd worked with Phil when I was living in sort of Africa, and so I used to go down there and work on my game, and he was the golf director at Disney World in Orlando. So that's how my sort of connection with Florida came about. And he actually, through his connections, I got a job teaching up in Chicago for a couple of summers, and which was interesting. And then I came back down to Florida and plonked myself where we first met at Greenleaf, which was a well-known resort back in the day. I mean, it was a established golf course destination, if you will. They had tour school there and all sorts of things. And so we opened an academy. Initially, it was the Andy Bean Golf Studio, because Andy Bean represented this course. So then after a year or so, we put my name on it. And that's really where the whole thing started, from my coaching. And I had players like Nick Price and Dennis Watson came over, and they subsequently got their tour cards. And so I worked with a whole host of the Southern African players, David Frost and Fulton Allen and you name it back in the day. And so, blast from the past, I suppose. But, so I established my reputation there, and obviously then, working with Sir Nick, which he wasn't back then, he is now, but that sort of changed things entirely after a couple of years, I might add, not initially. Initially, it was like everybody thinking, what's Nick doing? And
just before you get on to Nick, I was quite interested to know, when you first came over and you mentioned all the African guys, Dennis Watson and Nick Price, all fantastic players. Of those players in your early days, who kind of had the most influence in the way you coached and your ideas? Did they help you, or were you kind of getting your own ideas?
Well, it's a combination of things. I think as a coach and a teacher, especially when you're working with really top class players, you learn so much, you get so much feedback from these players. So through my studies, I'd always been interested in the golf swing, too much so probably to be a player. I think I probably got too technical and one thing or another, but I learned a lot. And prior to me going over and living in America, I actually went over a couple of times to teaching seminars by top teachers and so on. And so I'd always had my sort of nose to the nose to the grindstone. I'm not quite sure that's the saying, but anyway, I was always working hard at it, and books and videos and one thing or another, sort of pouring through them. And so I developed some of my own ideas and thoughts, and from players, from different teachers. It would be John Jacobs or whoever back in the day, and Phil Ritson was a big mentor. He was very much ahead of his time. He had some really good players that he worked with, and so I learned a tremendous amount. And then you sort of start to formulate your own ideas and philosophy, and it was almost like an embryo that started like that and just expanded and expanded and expanded. And we all know, look, in teaching and coaching, it's not so much what you know, it's how you say it. And so communication was the big thing, which I sort of had that naturally. And so it was a case really where I built up my own ideas, and then in retrospect, every player I worked with learned from other players that I worked with, whether it be Nick Price, who was a real student of the game, he had highlighted sort of Hogan's book when he was very young. And so we had some ideas, and it was a coming together of the minds. And so it was there's a little bit of trial and error, probably a little less so today with all the technology we have to sort of prove or disprove things. But it was, in many respects, I wrote a book in 1989, subsequent to, obviously, Sir Nick's great exploits. But in actual fact, so much of that, the basis of the book was called The Golf Swing, and it's still pretty much what I adhere to today. Obviously, I've expanded my knowledge and finding different ways to help different people, and that's the key, really. So you can sort of have an understanding of what you want to work on with a player, but it's like getting that message across where that player can actually utilize it and play with it in tournaments and under pressure.
Yeah, but I remember watching you at Greenleaf when I went there, because when I came over, but you had a lot of patience as well, because one or two of the people you were coaching, obviously at that time, weren't Nick Price, weren't Nick Faldo, etc. They weren't quite as good as those people. Right. I remember watching you thinking, God, he's got some patience to be standing there, but you seem to enjoy it, just helping out all of those kind of guys.
Yeah, to me, look, teaching and coaching has always been a labor of love, and I've always loved doing it and enjoyed it and seeing people improve. And so it's never been, I wouldn't like to, you look at an Ernie Els and say, well, he made the game look easy. I always felt that teaching and coaching was easy, because I could visualize the way I figured it out after a number of years. People ask me, well, how do you know what to work on, what lines to work on? Because I say, and even technology today, it's just a backup. It's not something that sort of guides me as far as my philosophy is concerned. It's a backup. And so very much like when video came into prominence, video was obviously huge as far as being able to sort of help people understand what was taking place. I remember one time at PGA Tour event over here. I can't remember where it was, but I mean, I think I probably had about 15 players. People say, "Oh, you're working with 15 players." I really wasn't. It was the first time they'd actually seen their swing on film. This is sort of going back to the early to mid 80s. So I'm not talking that many years ago. So things have come on a long, long way. So, but anyway, what I was getting back to was I was talking about was I sort of visualized how I think a person should swing, and then that's my model that I work towards. And sometimes it can change a little bit, but essentially you can set the roadmap. In my opinion, you can set a roadmap for somebody very early on, almost in the first time you meet them. You set the plan in motion, and then it's maybe a little adjustment here, add a drill here, get them focusing a little more on this area. But essentially, I say that my first session with any player, I still work with a number of players, not as many as I used to, just trying to slow down a little bit. But that's what, to me, it's trying to figure out. That's the joy of it to me, where you have to figure out, okay, what's the approach I'm going to work with this player, bearing in mind that each player is so different. Some are mechanically oriented, some are more feel oriented, some are visual, some are kinesthetic. So I mean, all these things have to, you have to tabulate in your mind as far as, okay, what's the approach that I want to make to actually help this player? And look, I'll be honest, I mean, it doesn't always work. It's not, I mean, there are players that, hey, I've seen some players and it didn't work, whether it was the chemistry or what have you. I mean, you're not going to be the be all and end all to everybody. So there are things that, you get on, there's this chemistry, and, you become, you become really good friends with these people. And, sometimes, you live and die with, cuts that they make and cuts that they don't make, that thing. So it's all part of the business, but it's been a lot of fun. I mean, obviously, it's led to a lot of other opportunities for me, opening academies, writing books, training aids, et cetera, and just meeting some great people along the way.
I mean, I remember when I first went to Greenleaf, and I used to come over the top of the ball and fade everything when I played in the Walker Cup, et cetera, et cetera. And I came back to you, I think I met you when I was at Florida State briefly, but I always remember you saying, this is what I think you need to do. And it's going to take, it's quite a big change to change what I was trying to do, but I was more than happy to do it. But I always kept thinking to myself, you never went off that path that you were trying to take me down. And my swing did change. And I think I became a better player from it. But I always remember thinking when I went home and that people said, what are he saying? Is he saying different things? But it's always the same kind of thing.
Yeah. And I've always tried to do that. I mean, it astonishes me that, I'm not going to mention any names, but you get players who work with coaches for a long time, and they're constantly saying, well, we're making a swing change now.
Yeah.
It's like, well, from my way of thinking, why, if they make a swing change now, what they worked on originally was not right. Or they didn't, at the time, they obviously went in the wrong direction. So, teaching and coaching, it's become very fashionable now. And I think to some extent, the work that I did with Sir Nick really, it helped the teaching industry, shall we say, because it became more fashionable to take lessons. Back in the days, it was like, well, you might sort of see your club pro or what have you, but then it became a business essentially. And so, I was just fortunate to be at the right place at the right time, really.
Just going, so obviously, talking about the Faldo relationship, how did it actually come about?
Well, I'd met Nick, I think we were playing, I can't remember where we were playing somewhere. Oh, I think he just turned pro. I think he was 18. I remember, I remember his minder at the time was Warren Humphreys, because Warren Humphreys was traveling with Nick, and I think it was George Bloomberg in South Africa, who was very well known in the game as far as helping young players come along and so on. That sort of almost like sponsored Nick, I suppose. And I was trying to think where it was, which event. It was some event in Southern on the South African tour. Anyway, so I knew of him, and obviously his exploits and the fact that he hadn't been pro, he hadn't played that for that long a period of time. I think he started when he was 15, so I think he turned pro when he was 18. So after he won the English Amateur, I think it was. And I think at the time, there were a couple of well-known coaches out there, people like Jimmy Ballard. Well, obviously John Jacobs in the UK, but Jimmy Ballard and maybe Bob Toski, and Hank Haney was starting to get a bit of a name with Marco Mira, and so I think Nick was looking around and trying to think in terms of, because he had a sort of at that point in time, he'd already won the Order of Merit, and before he came to see me, won Hilton Head. So he was already had a pretty decent career going, and so, but he wanted more. He just felt that he was lacking something, and so he at the time, he and Nick Price were pretty good friends, because they both were managed by IMG, and they traveled a little bit in Japan and what have you together. So I think Nick spoke to Nick, and because obviously with Nick Price, I'd started working with him back in 81, and he nearly won the Open in 82 at Troon. And he'd made, he got his tour card here, and so he made a bit of a splash when he first started, although he leveled off before he finally realized this. I think I better get going here, and so he put his foot to the pedal and became number one in his own right. But that's another story. But the interesting thing, so Nick recommended, said, hey, listen, I think if you want some questions answered, you should see David. So anyway, I was up at Muirfield. I remember I was working with Ian Baker Finch there, and then Nick came over to me and said, hey, listen, would you mind having a look? I've got some questions. And I think this was in 85, I believe. Yeah, 85 it was. And then so he said, listen, after about an hour or two, he said, okay, he said, you know what, I'm making a decision here. I really want you to throw, in his literal words, but I want you to throw the book at me. And so I said, listen, he said, I want to make some changes. I want to win the Open. I just don't believe I've got the game right now to win the Open, because he didn't flight the ball very well. He had beautiful rhythm, always had, and we never really changed that at all. But he, or tempo, I should say. He had this flow about it, and it was pretty much a swing out of the 70s, where you go back to the old Johnny Miller and even Jack Nicklaus, very high hand and reverse C and so on, and had a lot of success with it. But he really knew that he needed to learn to flight the ball. That was the first thing he wanted to do, learn to flight the ball lower. So he said, come on, let's go for it. I said, well, it's, and I did pre-warn him. I said, it's a bit of a risk, but I think I've got some suggestions that I think could really work. It might take a little while. He said, I really don't care what it costs. He says, I'm going full bore here. And so it was an open book, really, from that standpoint.
Did you when he said he didn't feel he was good enough to win the Open, of those kind of words, did you kind of quite in your own mind agree with him on that or not?
Well, I did, just from the standpoint of, look, if you had calm conditions for 4 days in a row, but when does that happen at the Open? Yeah. Maybe more so today with climate change, but not back then. You really need to flight the ball, and so you look at the players who were able to flight it. People like Trevino's and so on. If you go back in the day, and so Nick being as tall and gangly as he was back then, he had a very pretty high ball flight and a lot of spin on it. I always remember walking at Augusta. This was prior to me starting to work with him and seeing him hit shots which would carry and then come backwards, with the driver, and it's like, whoa, so you could see how much spin he was putting on it and how down he was on the ball. And so certainly now with TrackMan and things, he could probably proven it a little bit earlier. But the proof of the pudding was still in the ball flight. So my suggestion to him was to round his swing off more, to get more rotary rather than sort of slidey, which was the old way, and get his plane shallower, coming into the ball shallow, and really controlling the ball with his body rather than his hand and his arms. And so that's what we sort of went about working on. And so it was a combination of the way the body moved, the track that the hands and the arms followed, and it wasn't easy for him. As hard as he worked, literally the first couple of years or so, it was difficult. He was getting all sorts of flack back home and what have you, what's he doing, and who's this idiot that's trying to help him, etc., etc. So it really wasn't a pleasant time for him. I mean, he was losing sponsors. I mean, he nearly lost his card over here, and he had to play really well in the last event, which actually was near where we were at Greenville at Disney, and he had to finish in the top 10, and he did, and gutted it out, and so kept his card. But it was like, you could see there was little bits of progress here and there. I mean, he's a perfectionist, and when he went out and played, it wasn't quite his liking. It was probably too mechanical and so on. So, I might have changed my, not so much the content I would have changed, but just maybe the philosophy, how we went about doing it might have changed a little from what I know now. But, you could see it coming. And then it was like, it was interesting. It was actually April of 1987. I know that for a fact because it was the Masters, and the Masters at the time had a tournament opposite. I think it was a Magnolia Classic or something. It was a smaller event, for players who hadn't qualified for the Masters. And so I remember him telling me, he said, it was strange because he got to Atlanta airport, and he saw some players, going to the Augusta flight, and he was going to wherever the heck, the Magnolia Classic was being held in Mississippi or somewhere. But actually he played, I mean, he finished second there. That was really the start of some really, really, that was the start. And he shot, I think, 467s or something. He finished second. And then, the confidence built. And so he went over and he won the Spanish Open. And this was just prior to his first win at Muirfield in 1987. And so that's obviously, it was almost like the, I guess, the point being that, hey, all this hard work, all the effort that he put into it was culminated in winning there. And when we all know he's had 18 pars in the final round and very dodgy weather, and he beat Paul Azinger by, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the end. So
I remember the Open in '87, as I played in that Open, and I remember in 18 pars in the last round. The weather was pretty mucky as well, wasn't it? But just going back just a little bit prior, you were saying about working so hard, but in like the late 1986 time, beginning of '87, you probably didn't doubt it, but was he starting to doubt he'd done the right thing ever, do you think, or not?
From my perspective, he never ever doubted at all. He was 100% committed, and regardless of what people were saying, and so you had to give him full credit there, because I say a lot of people would have said, "Hey, blow this, I'm going to chuck this and go back to try to go back to what I was doing, or do something else to somebody else." But no, he stuck at it, fully committed, and I give him full credit for that, because it wasn't easy. It was tough, and so he was over here, and so probably could have gone back to Europe and played and what have you, but it was like it was almost like he had this vision and this image of himself being great, and it's all he really spoke about. I want to be number one. I want to win majors, and so that drove him. He was really very, very driven. He was a very interesting character. He and I really got on really well. We never had until the very end, we never had a bad word between us, and so he was great company off the golf course. But when he was on and around the golf course, he was a different individual. You heard that about Ben Hogan. And so he was, as they called him, the Iceman. And Nick very much was the same, and lost friendships and wasn't Mr. Popular, but he did what he had to do. He did say years later, he wished he'd had a different sort of character profile and could have been more relaxed and more friendly on the golf course. But I'll tell you, there's no way he would have been successful if he had. That was just that was his character. That's what he had to do. He sort of shut himself off and just put on the blinkers, and off he went. And it was like he just completely focused on the job at hand. And so in some ways he suffered in some ways, maybe his private life, etc. But he, from a golfing perspective, he really changed the way I think that players thought about professionally looking at the game. So if you look at, from that point in time, there were after we started working, I mean, other coaches came into prominence and players started working with coaches, which was pretty much unheard of, really, in the early years. I mean, they might have seen John Jacobs a little bit, say, on the European tour, what have you. And so, but it was very much a case of, hey, let's do it ourselves and we'll figure it out. And so, you know, Lee Trevino's old quote, well, you know, if I can find a coach that'll beat me, I'll listen to it. But, you know, it's changed a lot since then. Well,
you're right, because I mean, the ranges at tournaments, certainly in the early 90s, I mean, it was like traffic jams, wasn't it? Of people being on the ranges and coaches, and a lot of coaches suddenly, you know, turned up. But I mean, you had guys who worked under you, Simon Holmes, and people who went on to, you know, to help a lot of players as well, didn't they?
Yeah. We've had a lot of coaches through the years who, you know, done well and worked with tour players, and so it's still, you know, we have over 35 academies around the world with over 100 golf instructors. So and out of that lot, I mean, you're going to get some good ones, and we've had some good ones through the years. So I've probably created my own competition. So you know, so
but in a good way. In a good way, it must give you must give you pleasure that, you know, pleasure that looking back that these guys have come through your guidance, and you know, you've made them who they are, really.
Yeah, I mean, it gave them a start. I mean, I had a start. Everybody deserves a start, and so I mean, it's a big wide world out there. There's lots of players, and especially youngsters, who want to get coached in the right way, and we're seeing the benefits of that. We're seeing how many young players with better technique at younger ages who grow up with it, and so as a result, the standard's improving all the time.
Yeah. So when he won the Open in '87, it must have obviously given you a great deal of pleasure, him as well. But you know, the culmination of all the work you guys have done together, so it must have given you a lot of pleasure when he won it.
Oh, a tremendous satisfaction! It really was. I mean, I say, just like you felt like it was a culmination of everything that we've done, and the communal dream, I suppose, the communal goal, and it worked out. They don't always work out, but that, you know, it really did work out, and so there's no doubt. I mean, hey, at the time, I mean, you had the Nick Prices and the Greg Normans of the world around, and so it was, you know, and Ernie Els obviously latterly, but he for that period of time, I mean, from when he won the first Open in '87, I mean, for the next probably 7 years, or I mean, extended longer than that, but I think that sort of 6 or 7 year window was really a point where he was at his peak, and he was literally favourite every major to win. Not that he did, but he was favourite to win it, right? And so just with his ball striking and his control, and that was the thing I think that improved so much. Yeah, the swing improved, but I mean, why do you want to improve the swing? So you improve the ball striking, so you can improve the consistency and the reliability. And so that's what he had. I mean, he was just a superb iron player. I mean, not a long driver, ultra long for sure, but, you know, didn't miss that many fairways. He was a great wedge player, and, you know, he had a wonderful short game too. So he really had all the attributes, and had the mental focus too. I mean, he was very focused. I mean, when he and Fanny were like a team, as he and I were a team, he and Fanny were this team where literally they dissect a golf course to the nth degree, and they had a plan, a battle plan every time they went out to play. And so it was amazing that. So that it sort of went with his personality, that he just wanted to be so precise and so controlling in everything that he did. He didn't leave anything to chance. And even you know, he's one of the players, and he probably got a little bit misguided in many respects, but in the early years, I mean, where even from the workout standpoint, I mean, he started, you know, he was big into working out and getting his body in shape, and probably got too big at one stage, as we've seen with Tiger over the years. But he was delving into all these different areas, even the mental side of the game. You know, he was delving into that, and so he certainly was a pioneer in many respects for a lot of players out there. Subsequent to him.
In around 1990, was it, you started working with Ernie Els?
Yeah.
So obviously two totally different characters, really. But what are you what were you trying to do to help Ernie, really? Because I remember when he first came over to Europe, and I mean, it was just impressive when he was a young guy. He'd won the South African Open, I think, a couple of times, but I first saw him play at St. Mellion in the Benson Hedges. And I remember watching him, and he was a big strapping lad then. And you know, it was just impressive to watch.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, Ernie, more than anything else, I mean, it wasn't like we made major swing changes. It was like I helped him understand what he did. We made a couple little changes, like getting the club a little more online. He used to lay the club off at times, but I mean, just a great. I mean, just a natural athlete. He was good at cricket. He was good at tennis. He was good at rugby. So he played them all, and he was just naturally gifted. And so it was a case really of him just having somebody who he worked with his dad growing up and had some good fundamentals, and especially he's always his pace he developed at a very young age. So we kept it pretty simple in many respects. It was simple things like basics, just setting up to the ball the same way each time, getting your alignment, getting your ball position. I mean, things like, and if you go back in the day and studying some of the greats, people like Jack Nicklaus, that's what he did with his coach, Jack Grout, back in the day, right? I mean, it was a matter of he when they got together, it was a case, okay, let's just go through the fundamentals again. Let's just pretend I've never had a lesson from you. Okay, start off with the grip, start off with this. And so that essentially was it. And not to complicate it, but just to give him an awareness of what he did. So I don't care how good a machine is, at times it's gonna get off track a little bit. So when it's a matter of, hey, how do you help that player get back on track and understanding their own swing? And my philosophy has always been, Jeremy, to help players to become their own best coach. Okay, so once they've got the understanding and the knowledge and the concept, okay, so hey, these are your tendencies. This is what you got to watch out for, and it's always probably going to be the same. Okay, as much as sometimes feel can distort things and it feels a little different. Well, it's probably the same cause, and so you've just got to be aware of that. So making players more aware of it, because you don't want players to get overly technical and say, what is a perfect swing? I mean, the perfect swing for an Ernie Els or a Tiger Woods, they're completely different. So it's like different individuals, different body types, different mental capacity, etc., how they think about it. So, you're sort of designing a blueprint and a plan for each player.
Would you say he's probably, of the top players that you've coached, the most naturally talented? Certainly from the outside looking in, he looked the most naturally talented of the players you used to work with.
Yeah, no question. I mean, look, he was. Yeah, if there are not many naturals, but he was a natural.
Yeah,
and so he could do things with the ball. I mean, he had great hands. I mean, just wonderful around the green. So, and he just read the game well, and he kept it really pretty simple. I mean, and he was. They always call him the Big Easy. He wasn't, he was a little tough at times. I mean, he would appear to be, nice and relaxed and easy, but he was churning inside like all of them. And so he had that little sports psychologist from Holland, Josh. Remember Josh? The guy that, forgotten his surname now, but he was like his mental punch bag, if you will. He could get his frustrations out.
Yeah.
Well,
he was about twice the size of that guy, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
But so yeah, he was great to work with. I mean, and so we pretty much was there for 3 of his majors, and we had a little break and stuff. And I still see him periodically. I mean, it's like he still sends me swings on video, and he's just lucky that he's got one of those golf swings that have been ageless, and if you go back in the day to people like Sam Snead and the ability, to swing the club that length, and it's not quite as Ernie's swing is not quite as dynamic as it used to be, but it's not far off, to be honest.
No, but he used to create power with, and he made it look easy, didn't he?
did. Yeah,
he didn't.
yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like some of the other guys. But another story I remember also, another guy who to me you coach was just amazing when I first played him, was Charles Howell III. Because I remember when you used to do those weeks at Greenleaf in the wintertime when the European Tour had finished, we went over there. And one of the times we went over there, there was only three of us there. It was me, Roger Winchester, and Justin Rose. And the other one was Charles Howell. Well, he wasn't a pro then. He was only about 16. And I remember you saying to me and Rog, this guy's only 16 and whatever. And anyway, so we played 9 holes at Lake Nona. And I mean, man, it was just impressive to watch. I mean, it was just unbelievable, I thought. I remember saying to Rog, God, this is unreal at this age.
Yeah. He, I mean, funny enough, I mean, I coached Charles for a number of years, and he's just funny enough, just come back to us, believe it or not.
Right.
And so he's doing a lot of work with my associate Sean Hogan, and it's interesting. I mean, look, he's been a money machine. I mean, if you look at his career, how many? Yeah. I mean, he's only won 3 tournaments. I mean, which is crazy. I mean, when I look back, I would have sworn. I mean, almost a bit like Michelle Wee. I would have said, these two are going to win 30 tournaments in their careers, including a bunch of majors. And so, but it was interesting. That's why when we first spoke earlier, I talked about developing hand-eye coordination and what have you. Charles was one of those young players, about at the age of 6. He played no other sport. It was purely golf. So he couldn't kick a ball. He couldn't throw a baseball, as they do over here, and figure out the distances in the field. He couldn't play table tennis or shoot baskets at basketball. He wasn't interested. And so he developed himself into a golf athlete. And so, but the problem with that is that, he was, his ball striking was amazing. I mean, you just heard the ball come off the club face. It was like a bullet.
Yeah.
And so, but he never had that touch, that ability to sort of, dial things down a little bit there and take a little bit off. And his wedge play was sort of, average. I mean, and he didn't have the versatility because it was all sort of, it was a very mechanical approach. And to say it served him well as far as, I mean, look, he's won close to $40 million, I think, in his career now. And so, and he's still going strong. I mean, he's in his early 40s now. So it's interesting. I mean, how time flies. It's hard to imagine really when I started working with him, he was about 13 or 14 or something. But it's, look, what did Trevino used to say? God didn't give everybody everything, So it's as if, talent comes in many different forms, really.
Yeah, but I remember playing him. Well, I say 16. He must have been maybe 18, because I think he just started. He was in his freshman year at college, and I remember saying to him, he was the number 3 ranked player in college, who was number 1 and 2, and number 1 and 2 was Luke Donald and Paul Casey. Yeah, funnily enough at the time. But I remember playing with him, with Rose and Roger, and thinking he was just was going to be an unbelievable player. But as you rightly say, he's not given everything. So that was that one. Who was the most kind of technical? And I asked you who was the most gifted player, Ernie Els. Who was the most player who really wanted to be technical that you coached?
I probably, if I go back in the day, I mean, there've been players latterly, but back in the day, probably Ian Baker Finch was actually one of the players that wanted to know everything technically. And so much so that he, even though he'd won the Open and he competed well over here. I mean, he drove the ball on a string, but he was a sort of a Nick Faldo type player, all about control. I mean, he was never the most powerful player, but he had it in his mind that he wanted to hit it longer. And he went back and worked with somebody in Australia on some philosophy. And I remember him coming back after his winter break and said, "Hey, this is what I'm working. What do you think?" And and I sort of looked at it, and he got away from his. I mean, he was mechanical in the beginning, but we got him to a point where he really trusted what he was doing. Now, I've always felt, Jeremy, that it's like when players get to around the age of 28 to 30, you've pretty much got your DNA. I mean, you can make some slight tweaks, but it hasn't happened very often. It happened maybe with Steve Stricker, who have had this sort of, their games have been resuscitated, if you will. I mean, in an effort to get better, people got worse. Yeah. And that sadly was the case with Ian. I mean, because he got to a point where he couldn't drive it, on a 3 football fields wide. I mean, getting out of bounds at St Andrews and so on the first tee. That, it basically became a sort of a mental thing, almost like the yips, with the driver. And so it was a case in an effort to get better, he delved back in the technique sort of things rather than just having what he had and said, okay, hey, I'm doing a good job with this. And he was a top ranked player and won the Open, and unbelievable putter. And so, you've got to look at where your pluses and where your minuses are. Yeah, maybe you work on your weaknesses, but so much emphasis is placed on the swing, on creating this perfect swing, as opposed to, you want a perfect pattern, not necessarily a perfect swing. You want a swing that produces these patterns and this consistency and control. And so if you start, all of a sudden, we know how the mind works. When your mind is calm and quiet and you have belief and trust in yourself, that's when you play your best. It's like, you get your head full of so much information that it's hard to
So the thing with Baker Finch, him trying to create more power, as it were, in these days and create more speed, you think was the start of his downfall, really? Because he, as you rightly said, he was at the very top of the game, and he fell down pretty quickly, didn't he?
He did, and he'll admit it now too. He's just that sort of he's a great guy. He really always liked him and his family, and so, but he had that. He didn't quite have that inner belief that he was that good. He never even when you're playing his best, he never liked his swing. He'd hate looking at it on video. No, I don't like looking at that. Just give me something to work on. It was like that. And so he was a little frail in that area, and so I suppose there is a case of maybe being too nice a person, in many respects, and you've got to have a bit of that sort of, what attitude in you.
Because he not being negative or anything, he did fall from grace a bit. He was a bit like, if you remember, Bill Rogers, wasn't he? He was another one who kind of...
just never really heard of them again,
somebody said he won 8 tournaments around the world the year he won the Open Championship, and he kind of went, but there you go.
And it's funny how these players are so different from a character standpoint. Somebody like a Nick Price, who's really genuinely a nice guy. They call him, Mr. Nice, instead of Mr. Price. But inside he had that inner strength to, he said, hey.
But he was, again, I remember watching him when he first went to Lake Nona and he was there, and watching him hit balls. With the equipment in those days, I remember him using Spalding irons, actually. Yeah. They certainly didn't look very easy to hit.
No, right.
But he was a proper striker of the ball, wasn't he?
Yeah, and it's funny. He doesn't play much these days. or doesn't play competitively anyway. But but he still loves to hit balls, and I see him periodically, and he sends me the odd video here, and he says, "What do you think?" SOS, same old stuff.
Yeah. I remember watching him. So, the obviously the game's changed incredibly over the years. From the playing side of it, and the courses, the ball distances, the technology, and everything, and also with the coaching as well. But from your point of view as a coach, what do you think are the kind of things that's made the game better? And are there any things that you kind of think you wish that the R&A and the USGA had never let happen?
Look, I suppose people call it progress, right? You would like to think in terms of that. The skill now is how strong you can get, how far you can hit it, almost, as opposed to how you control the ball. With the old Bellotta ball and the way it's spun. I think back to Nick Price. He was able to control the spin of that Bellotta ball, and he was long.
Yeah.
But when balls changed and equipment changed, went to metal drivers and so on. He was just average length, because and so he found it difficult to control the flight of the ball. So So I think, look, I mean, there's been a lot of progress. I mean, technology, whether it be launch monitors or force plates and stuff. I think that that certainly helped, and it quickens the process if it's used correctly. My fear is that in some cases that it's used incorrectly, that you get a lot of young teachers who are very gung-ho, and they've got a TrackMan with them. They go out and say, okay, here, let's see if we can get you close to zero, and zero it out here. And the way I like to use technology, and even video back in the day when it first came out, because I was a big advocate of video back in the day.
Yeah, I remember that.
I didn't just use it. I mean, you get lazy. I mean, even today, I get our teachers to teach without video, any technology whatsoever, just to get their eyes trained to sort of look for things and, hear the ball strike, look at the divot, look at the flight and the shape of the ball, look at the odd bad shot that they hit that keeps cropping up. And so, because it tells you a lot, if you just simply go onto a machine, I mean, they can do away with golf and golf coaches. I mean, it's like a little tape will come out and say, hey, well, this is this and this, work on this drill and that drill, and you'll be fine. And especially, I mean, so much of teaching today is geared towards top players. Okay, if you look at it, I mean, it's all, I mean, you go on YouTube, and I mean, it's all, I mean, there's thousands of, I mean, something like 7 million pieces of advice on YouTube about fixing your golf swing. And so it's for the average golfer, I mean, it's interesting when you look at the era we live in now. I mean, people actually have less time to play and practice and work on their games than they did in past years, right? I mean, somebody emails you or texts you got to answer in the next 30 seconds. In the old days, you maybe call them back the next day on your answering machine.
Yeah.
But, so there's a rush in everything we do. And so, and the problem is you're still dealing, majority of golfers don't have the talent to be able to sort of employ some of this stuff that's being put out there now. And it's too complicated, too technical. That's why, back in the day, the John Jakes of the world and Harvey Penix and what have you were very successful, because they kept it simple for the average golfer. So I think we have to look at it in teaching and coaching, obviously we teach a lot of young players. We have a full-time junior academy, which is it's fun. I mean, you get these young athletes. I mean, they're all got dreams, and boys and girls, to become the best players, and it's fairly regimented what they're doing. The mental side of it, the nutritional side, the workout side, the technical side. But you still like to see a player. We just brought a kid over from Ukraine and managed to sort of get him out of Ukraine, and he was a junior, and he's got a bit of a quirky swing. And I've told he's joined our academy. We gave him a scholarship, which is something we could do. And so he's a great young kid. His name's Misha Golod. He went up and PGA Tour, did a number, and he grew up to.
Oh yeah, I did see it.
The players, they recognize him on the first tee and all that. So anyway, he's a great young. But the point being is, I digress a little bit, but he's got a bit of a quirky swing. But man, he's a player. You can get the ball in the hole, and he keeps it simple. And I said to the guys, look, this is not a revamp. I mean, the kid didn't actually apply to come. I mean, it was out of circumstances. So we want to help him and really build what he's got. So so I think there's, technology is great. It's wonderful. I mean, some of it is too, I mean, even I look at it and think, my goodness, I couldn't teach, even if I had the knowledge of, the biomechanics, which my good friend, JJ Rivet, who's been, he said, you're lucky, David. I said, why is that, JJ? He said, you have biomechanical eyes, which you can then translate what you're seeing into sort of maybe a feel or a drill or something. And so, so I've got involved with this technology. We've got now involved with a company called SportsBox, which is unbelievable. I mean, you can actually turn a 2D, you can actually film somebody on 2D, and then through an app, change it into 3D. So now you've got the avatar of your swing. On your cell phone. You don't have to have all the gear to all the markers and all this sort of stuff. So very simple. So it's great. And but say if it's used correctly, and so that's the thing. And so I mean, look, I came up through the ranks. I mean, when I started teaching when I was 17, right? I mean, I was giving lessons. Heavens knows what I was teaching back then, but still. And so I've given thousands of lessons over the years, and so I think a lot of the young teachers today, they come into it thinking, okay, hey, I want to go on tour and work with a couple of players. I'm a pretty decent player myself, and it's like, well, you've almost got to pay your dues, and so even though if you're working with Mrs. Johnson, it's like, okay, well, how can I get the message across to this person as say this star-studded junior that I've got coming next? So I to me, I've always enjoyed teaching every level of player, because it's a challenge to sort of find a way to be able to help that person with whatever talent level they possess.
I mean, to me, when I see some of the young guys at the driving range, for example, just a local driving range, there's so much technology now, as you rightly say. If they don't know how to use it properly, and they're teaching a young junior, it could really be detrimental to what they're trying to do.
For sure, absolutely, no, 100%. And so, I mean, in the end, you can still go back to, I really used to enjoy his company and speaking to him, John Jacob, because even though his ball flight laws they've been disproved with TrackMan now, the fact that the club face position, the club face at impact really affects where the ball starts, where it was the old days, it was the exact opposite. It was almost like the path. The path is the thing that affects where the ball starts, and the club face affected the spin. Well, they've now disproved that. But even so, he was a master of being able to look at things and be able to change things, and simplicity for the average golfer. I mean, they would actually improve, and so might not always have been lasting, but for a period of time, an average golfer could actually start to understand what they had to do in order to get better. So sometimes the old ways are still pretty good, and so it's so I always encourage our coaches, read some of the old books back in the day. It's like, you just don't want to read what's going. If you just look at YouTube, it's like it's all pretty much the same, and the lingo they're talking. Well, the trail arm and the lead leg. It's like, oh, what the hell? I mean, why don't you just call it the right arm and the left leg? It's like it has to be so technical that it's like, it's like. So I mean,
that's what I mean when I say.
I'm not bitter in any form or shape, because it's like I enjoy it. There's no question. But I do think, look, the game of golf is difficult for most players, right? I mean, even the best players, it's not a game they can completely master. I don't even the great Tiger Woods has never mastered it to a point where he maybe did for a short period of time, and probably more so than any other player maybe in the history of the game, including Jack Nicklaus. But still, so we have to be careful about trying to create this perfect model, shall we say? And so, and you've got to take into account a person's talent level, and even a good young player, if they've got a fantastic short game and great putters, and it's like, yes, you can develop their technique, and you want to a point, but you've got to bear in mind that person's mindset as well. Are they able to take in this information? So there's a lot more to it. That's why, say, having experience working with a lot of different players is something that we just don't let our teachers, even when they join us, sort of start working with good players straight away. There's just no way. You can't. I mean, no. If they want to go out on the golf course, maybe talk about some strategy, well, that's one thing. But when you talk about technical stuff, it's like you got to know what you're doing, because one bad thought can really ruin somebody.
Do you think that the changes and like the technology and TrackMan, and you're saying 2D and 3D, do you think it's slowing down a little bit? And if it does slow down, it's probably not a bad thing, is it? So that people can just young guys can still just remember to go out on the golf course and play golf.
And play, exactly, yeah.
And not learn on a driving range.
Yeah, well, it always brings me back to the story. I remember when I went to Japan. I used to go to Japan a lot, and we went to this particular driving range, and I saw this guy hitting balls, and I just stood and watched. I said, oof, this guy's one heck of a striker. He was hit drivers out there, sort of had this little baby fade, I remember, and I mean, good looking swing. So I said, is this guy a pro? And they said, he's never been on the golf course. It's like he was a practicer, Yeah. That's what his life was, practicing. And so it's like, whoa, okay. So, I mean, look, I think it's getting the right blend. I mean, look, if you can use, intuition plays an instinct for coaches and teachers plays an awfully big role, especially when you're out of a tournament. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to work on detailed mechanics out of the tournament. I mean, I can remember several times when I went out there, a player wasn't swinging particularly well, and you just gave him just a little something, just something to get their mind focused more than anything else, probably. And it worked. And so I remember when Dennis Watson won, we were still talking about Dennis Watson won the World Series up at Firestone. And my wife, Kelly, we were having our first child at that time. But it was like, I remember distinctly, he said, man, I just feel like I'm spinning out of it a little bit there. And, and I said, okay, so all I want you to do, Dennis, is I want you to get your weight into I want you to feel pressure and weight in your big toe on your left foot as you start your downswing. So just go out and hit the ball, feel that pressure there. And he said it worked like a charm. I think he shot 62 that day or something, but it was something silly, simple. It was like it was a mechanic, but it was something very simple that you could that he could get his mind into without having to geez, I'm really not hitting that well. I'm not. And it got better and better as the week went on. So it was. It's interesting, teaching, coaching. I mean, it's never going to be an exact science. Okay, it's an art form, and so so I always encourage players. Look, learn as much as you can, and so you can teach as simply as you can, because that's to me, if you can teach simply, I mean, you don't have to let somebody in front of you know everything you know about the golf swing. Okay, it's like players, right? All they need to know is about their swing, about their game. They don't need to know about everything else that's going on, okay? Because, I mean, you're going to get completely messed up that way. Yeah. So it's like, just hey, follow. That's why I say setting a blueprint and a plan for somebody's progress is vital.
So I've got a couple more things. A friend of mine, I told him that I was going to be talking with you, and he asked me, his question was, first of all, what do you think of Bryson DeChambeau? But the main part of the question he wanted to ask was the relation or the similarities between Bryson DeChambeau and Mo Norman.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you look at it,
am I mistaken? But did Mo Norman come to Greenleaf one time?
Yeah,
not to Greenleaf, to Lake Nona.
Yeah, he used to come out and practice somewhat. Yeah,
that's right. I thought so. Yeah.
A lot of people won't know who Mo Norman was. He was a Canadian guy that literally he was actually a little bit autistic.
Yeah.
And so he didn't really play outside of Canada. I mean, he'd won, I don't know how many tournaments he won up there, but he was a different sort of fella. I mean, it could be 90 degrees out, you're wearing a polo neck with a pullover on, it was like, oh my God. And he used to live in his car, and it was like, he was one of those stories and that developed over the years, and one of those characters of the game, because I mean, he was certainly one of the straightest hitters ever. I mean, because literally had control over. I mean, he used to practice with a bowling ball on the end of a shaft, where the thing, so he could get the lag as he changed direction. And he had the reason why they used the similarity of Bryson and him as that, he actually had a wide stance. He used to set the club head about 6 inches behind the ball. Yeah. He used to whip it away, and he worked very much on one plane. Okay, so the club pretty closely matched. The plane that it went back on was the plane that it came down on, and that really that was pretty much Bryson. Although he's changed a little bit, it's not quite as marked as it was. And he worked on one of the wheel type situation where what they call the explainer, I think it was, where you go up and down. I've never been a huge believer in it, because I've always felt that the most important plane is your downswing plane. So. And I've always felt that, hey, by having a little steep, there's a natural ability to sort of shallow it coming down. So I've always got sort of a steep to shallow. I've had a couple of players who they did it well, and they stuck on the same plane. But I would say probably, if you look at the players today, there's probably 70 to 75% of players have a slightly steeper backswing plane than their downswing plane. And so the similarity pretty much ends there. I mean, and they had very high hands at address, almost like the shaft and the the left arm in particular were in one line, very arched, almost left wrist, and so swung it back. Without from that position, you're not going to get a lot of wrist set. So it was sort of a later wrist set, if you will. And so they try to copy Mo Norman's method. I think they call it natural golf or something. I mean, it just, because he used to have these really thick grips on. It was like, and he was a very strong guy. I mean, very strong guy, but he hit thousands upon thousands of balls. I mean, there was a story where he opened this driving range up in Canada. He hit 3,000 balls during the day and missed something like about 30 fairways all day. A set fairway. That's how straight this guy hit it. I mean, it was incredible. It wasn't long.
No.
The story goes, and you never quite know how true it was, but apparently he did play at Augusta one year, and he walked off the course, and he'd say everything twice. This is why everybody figured that was a little bit autistic in the end. He'd say, too slow for Mo, and he walked off the golf course. So it was like, he was part of folklore now. Yeah,
I remember seeing him at Lake Nona, and it was different watching him, but it was it was an impressive. Yeah, it was impressive. So
he'd catch anybody's eye, and he'd go along Bay Hill, and he'd be hitting balls there, and they'd have a crowd around him and so on.
Yeah, I remember that. So my final question is nothing to do with coaching, really. It's just your views on professional golf and Greg Norman, and well, not Greg Norman necessarily, but the Saudis' involvement or potential involvement, and what it might do to the game. What's your kind of feeling on it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, look, golf is always going to be. I mean, it's one of the last bastions, probably, of sort of the way things were, so to speak. If you go to Augusta, I mean, no cell phones and all the rest of it. It's trying to keep the traditions, which in some ways is quaint, in some ways it's a pain in the neck. But it's one of those things that you look at and you think, okay, so if it wasn't the Saudis, would it be somebody else who would come in there and do it? I mean, obviously they've got money, and I mean, really the idea of a world tour was pretty much Greg Norman's back in the day, and he got shoved out of it by the PGA Tour. So, and look, the players on the PGA Tour we know at the top of the list, so to speak. The players up there, I mean, they're making a fantastic living. Have great pensions at least on the US Tour they do. But they with their endorsements and everything else, and people say they're greedy and stuff, and it's like they only have a window. And you look at some of the players, okay, who are purported to be going to be playing on this tour. I mean, some of them are in their 40s, and it's like, well, hey, this is a chance for a huge payday. And it's always interesting when you get players together. I mean, I think that they are going to need some of the other players to compete, and maybe they can come together with a meeting of the minds. Maybe there's room for something like this, and obviously, people have their say whether they like what goes on in Saudi Arabia or not, and sport washing and all the rest of it. But it is what it is. Look, where there's money involved, and where there's players who are great athletes, they want to make a great living out of it. I mean, do they do it for the love of the game? To some extent, yes. I mean, that's certainly the way they started. But now it's like, hey, they want to create a living, and they can, and they're making a good living out of it. So, I don't know. I think in some ways, I mean, some of the players, they look at it, it's like, hey, well, we don't want to get politics involved with sport. I mean, it's so intermingled, and the world is such a bloody mess these days. That it's like, So what if the Russians started, put money behind the tour, what do they, as I say, I mean, prior to all the stuff that's been going on, I mean, with everybody being au fait with that, with, their human rights records, or, I mean, where does it stop? I mean, so I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I think a lot of people do. And I think they're going to persevere with it and pursue it. Yeah. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, it'll be interesting. I'm sure you're going to still get pretty big crowds going along.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first one's next month in June at Centurion Club, so it'll be interesting to see who plays in it. And as you rightly say,
it will be. I mean, I'm sure it's not going to be the field that they would want, and I mean, some players definitely are thinking in terms of it for sure. And so we'll have to see how persuasive Mr. Norman is in this regard. You know,
I think in a way, you know, that say the amazing amount of money going into it, but also there's so many young guys trying to make a living from golf. The money's going to go down the ladder a bit, not their money, but it'll make money and tournaments spread out a bit more. And there's so many guys in Asia trying to play, and South Africa and Europe and that. So I don't think it's a bad thing, really, as long as it doesn't create where the best players in the world don't play in the majors. In my opinion, I think there might well be room for these kind of tournaments.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's as you say, I mean, maybe the players come together too often these days, you know, whereas playing less frequently together makes the majors sort of more exciting, right?
Yeah,
so, I mean, that's a different league, right? It's like, it's you know, whether you, I mean, that's obviously why a lot of people aren't in favor of a sort of a football league, you know, having just top teams, right? Because there's no promotion relegation. There's not the excitement of, you know, a lower team beating the upper team, you know, the best team. And so I don't know. It's funny. It's a changing world, and I mean, the way countries conduct their own affairs. I mean, it's always been that way. It's just now with the internet, everybody's a little bit more aware of what's going on in certain places. I mean, the world has never been a complete paradise, that's for sure. You know that, you know, in certain countries, and it never will be, right? So
no, exactly.
What do you just stop living because of it? No, I mean, hey, you try to get countries or governments to sort of behave themselves more and look after their people, but it's just the way it is. It's like, you know, it's like, yeah, I mean, is the government in Saudi Arabia any worse than the government in China? I don't know. You know, I mean, you'd have to look at it. It's like, you know, but people, you know, they certainly weren't banning, you know, players to go and play in China, were they? You know,
no, exactly. So that's a very, very true point. And so it will be interesting in 3 or 4 years' time if we were sat here again to see which direction it goes in. So
exactly.
Just finishing off, so again, thanks very, very much for coming on. It's been intriguing to hear your views. I mean, your views have always been intriguing to me, and I've always enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you.
So just to finish off, a couple of quick fire questions, Dave. Your favourite course in the world?
Royal County Down.
Oh yeah, nice, very nice. The favourite major you still go to?
The Open.
Favourite city in the world?
I would say Sydney.
And then here's one, and you needn't answer this if you don't want to, but the most satisfying win by a player that you were at the time coaching? Not necessarily a major, but any tournament.
Yeah, I mean, probably just because of our close friendship through the years was when Nick Price won at Turnberry in '94. Because I mean, that was like, it was, I mean, look, every win satisfying, and the wins with Sir Nick, especially the first one, was really satisfying. But just from a standpoint of happiness for the individual and the fact that we'd grown up together and what have you, seen Nick, you know, I always remember that jump that he had on 17 there, really about 4 foot in the air when he held that, you know, tram liner there. So that probably was, I would say, that was the most satisfying.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. Well, as I say, many thanks for coming on. It's been really great listening to you. And
because there was one question I think you were going to ask me when you didn't, something about a lesson which was your most memorable lesson.
Well, that's the very, very final question, actually.
It is okay.
Yeah, right. But I didn't want to keep you too long. But anyway,
no, that's all right.
Finally,
right. I saw that there, and I thought I had to think about it. Because I've had a lot of memorable lessons, you know, and probably my most memorable lesson was, you know, I had this young lady who had a really good amateur record and just turned pro and was playing well in some mini tour events, and she came to me for a lesson, and this is way back at Greenleaf, in fact, and you know, I watched her hit it, and I thought we've got to take the head cover off here because there's not really any compression, there's not really any sort of strike to it. But I mean, she had a heck of a record, great short game. So anyway, sort of I ended up marrying her. That was Kelly. But 38 years later, we're still together, and and she was a heck of a player, So I would say she was a heck of a student up until the day we got married. So
I can see why you wanted to answer that question then. So you can't beat that one.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
No. All right. Brilliant. All right. Well, I say thanks very much, David. It's been good catching up as well.
Yeah, great, Jeremy. All the best to you. And well, I speak to your mate Roger Winchester occasionally. He's still still doing his thing, So
I did actually speak to him this morning. I told him what was going on. So
he did. Right. I think he's loving it on South Beach down in Miami. I think it's his sort of scene, really,
Oh, it is. No, it's great. All right, Dave. All right. That's been brilliant. So thanks very much, and we'll catch up soon. All right. Thanks, Dave.
All the best.
Cheers. Bye-bye.